we're talking about today is non-content use cases for generative AI in producing content. So essentially, how do you use AI techs in your content marketing and content other operations in ways other than the obvious one of using them to generate content? So first and foremost, I'm going to thank Lindsay, who was just on there a second ago, for handling all of this. And in general, she's actually just come on full time, so that's cool to do growth activities, including this webinar series. So I really do appreciate this. All I have to do is show up and talk, which is nice. And speaking of me, I'm Eric. If you're watching live or in a recording and not familiar with me, I'm the founder and CEO of Hit Subscribe, and I've had a little bit of an eclectic career. Did a long stint of software engineering and then management consulting in that space. And then for the last 8 years, wow, really, yeah, 8 years, this marketing, content marketing, and SEO and dev tools content business, which is a long story in and of itself. But that stuff kind of gives me, I like to think, an eclectic and interesting perspective on the tooling that we're talking about here today and how to approach it. So I'm going to start off before talking about the specific use cases, going through the strengths and weaknesses of this type of tool. It is obviously extremely powerful. So it's very powerful and efficient for synthesizing information and also for retrieval and lookup. Um, so it can go out and really parse the internet, synthesize it, and present it to you. And that's extremely powerful. And that's great for filling in knowledge gaps if you're not an expert in something. You want to learn how to repair an engine in a car or something like that, and you have no idea how to do it. Pretty good for something like that, better even than YouTube and finding videos. It can walk you through stuff like that. The technology itself, given the machine learning behind it, is also very good at pattern recognition and expanding on patterns. It's helpful with feedback with specific prompts. So if you're asking for specific kinds of feedback, it's good at doing that, which makes it well suited for scenario modeling and role play, talking to prospective users and trying to channel how they would react to you. As for weaknesses, some of these are lampooned and well documented, but the first one I want to mention is non-determinism. So what that essentially means is that there's an element of randomness between input and output. If you write a program in C# or Python or something to sort a list, every time you give it a list to sort, you will get the same output. The input determines the output. That isn't true with these tools. You give them the same prompt 2 times in a row and you will get two different responses, varied either slightly or a lot. That actually kind of makes it a little bit difficult. You don't really want randomness in SOPs. So creating SOPs on top of it, there's a challenge there to deal with that non-determinism. They're factually unreliable. I mean, they tell you to eat rocks and things of that nature. So, in some small percentage of cases, they will just give you wrong information. And compounding that is the lack of ability to self assess or executing bad judgment, if you will. Meaning, if you ask it a question and it doesn't know the answer, it will make it up instead of saying, I don't know. Um, and one thing that I've noticed a lot over the course of time is if you're very specific with your prompting and what you're looking for, it's good. If you just give a general question like, I have a blog, what should I write about? Instead of asking you, hey, can you be more specific like a person would, it will just tell you stuff. And it's also intensely sycophantic. So the nature of these tools is they predict what the user is expecting to see next. And tied up with that, because of the way the human brain works, is what you want to read next. So it gets very good at telling you what you want to hear, and you need to manage that dynamic. So I'm going to offer a couple of heuristics that go into how we think about using these technologies in content creation, content operation. The first heuristic is you're the expert, and the tool is, as this article I found puts it, a smart drunk intern, which I had never heard of anything like that before. I didn't actually even read the article. I just saw the graphic and I thought this is a really great description because it's really good, like a hyper efficient genius intern at going and looking things up and synthesizing them for you and filling in knowledge gaps. It's excellent at that, but it will make things up instead of admitting it doesn't know. And that is kind of more of the behavior, the lack of judgment of the drunk part of the smart drunk intern. So you need to act as the adult and apply that to what you're doing. So it's going out and fetching the median wisdom of the internet. Is that useful to you or not? it might not be as much in the content creation or certain aspects of it because you want to exercise probably more than the median wisdom of what's out on the internet for whatever you're talking about. And you can't really trust the tool to make that distinction itself. A second heuristic when it comes to using content ops for minimizing risk is I tend to think that one of three things needs to be true in the way that you're interacting with the tool. Number one, you're interacting with it where you can immediately verify whatever it's telling you. Or number two, it doesn't matter if what it's telling you is exactly factual or not. That does come up a fair bit. And number three, you would use the tool to give you information where the alternative or feedback where the alternative would have been to simply do nothing. That one of these three things, and maybe more than one of these three things, should be true. So, for instance, I use ChatGPT a lot to give me SQL statements if I'm interacting with our Looker tooling and refining it. Write me a SQL statement that does X. If the SQL statement is improperly formatted or it doesn't do what it's supposed to, I will know immediately. So I don't need it to be right because I can just say, hey, that wasn't right. I got this error and it'll course correct. If you're asking it for subjective information, scenario modeling, right and wrong isn't exactly a thing. When you say who's the best quarterback in the NFL, it's a matter of opinion. So there, sure, why not go with its opinion? And then the alternative is doing nothing. So imagine a scenario where you're signing up for like Apple's terms and conditions, and that's like 8,000 pages of legalese. You would most likely by default just agree to it without reading it. You could always feed it in and say, hey, is there anything in here that I should be worried about? That's a perfectly good use case, that synthesis and quality assurance in lieu of doing nothing. Um, so when it comes to content, here are some examples of where I think it's a good versus, here be dragons type of use case. Good, come up with some ideas and I'll decide if those ideas are good. Then you're the expert adult. It is the intern. Summarize this for me and I'll read the summary that you put together. Same dynamic. Surface some issues or risks and I'll triage them. Again, you're maintaining the expertise there and you're delegating. Poke holes in this idea insanity check. That's a little harder to get a subordinate to do, but it is not hard to get the tool to do, and that's a pretty valuable use case. Like, here is what I'm thinking. What am I missing? Help me recognize some risks. And then finally, prototype something, and I'll review it and take it from there. This is getting into the agentic use cases, like go out and vibe code me up some stuff. If you're treating that as a prototype and thing to build on, that can be pretty valuable to get from zero to, I wouldn't call it one, but 0 to 0.5 fairly quickly. Where I would be careful is come up with some ideas and we'll do those. So now you're flipping and you're delegating the strategy and expertise to the tool. And that can be okay if you don't have strategy and expertise and there's no one around to help you with that. But if you can avoid it, I wouldn't do that. Write this for me and I'll publish it. Again, that's where the drunk intern metaphor comes to mind. The intern may be very smart, but I don't know if I want my drunk intern publishing content on the site. What should I do next? So open-ended guidance I would stay away from, and then build this for me and I'll use it at scale. This is where, I mean, my career of software engineering, vibe coding used to be Stack Overflow coding, used to be, various other things. It can get you to a prototype rapidly. Building on top of it starts to get dicey, so I would be careful. As for why not talk about content creation, there's kind of two things here. Number one, I don't know if it's enough content for an entire webinar. I mean, like, prompt the tool, read what it puts out, and then iterate. It's not rocket science. That said, if people are interested, there are tactics, tips, and tricks. Like, I could probably do something about it. But for the time being, I thought it might be more interesting to, talk about this alternative way of using it. And also, again, having the drunk intern create the content is risky if you have better alternatives. So, it's the theme of it's going to give you the median wisdom of what people have talked about on the internet. You probably want to be above that in the subject matter that you're talking about generally on your site. So now I'm going to get into the tactics. I wanted to offer a few brief caveats here first as to what you're about to listen to. I am speaking from field experience of hit subscribe. So that's a lot of top of the funnel content creation, content program management and fulfillment, SEO. We do a ton of that. And we generate and broker thought leadership content too. So this is where we've spent the most of our focus, as opposed to, how to use this to do like PR or what have you, is not as much of a focus for us. It's a playbook of things that we've experimented with. I personally have done an awful lot of R&D as these tools have come out and evolved. The things I'm going to present here are by no means exhaustive. The fact that it doesn't exist in this presentation doesn't mean it isn't valid or you couldn't do it. And your mileage may vary. Some of these tactics may not apply to your specific situation, or you might not feel comfortable using them. I'm kind of laying out a buffet. So before I go any further, any questions, I guess, about the setup? I haven't seen anything, so I'm going to assume no. Lindsay, please interrupt me if there were. Um, so first of all, I'm going to kind of go through, roughly speaking, the content life cycle, starting with ideation. Practical tactics for using LLM text and ideation. These are ones that I have had luck with. Developing detailed reader avatars or personas, and then subsequently brainstorming questions that those folks would have about a given area, because that's ripe for content creation ideas. Surfacing commercial keywords, and then mining artifacts that you have, like reviews, support tickets, Q&A, community forums, that type of stuff for content ideas. So starting out, fleshing out and referencing reader personas, you can see just a quick thing that I threw in here in the screenshot. What are some pains here? So you would start prompting the tools like this and then teasing out more and more and more specifics. Now, if you have documentation, maybe you've done some persona write-ups, or you have collateral about the persona or from the persona, anything you can supply like that is going to help. But this use case is a particularly appealing one because depending on your persona, but in most cases, there is an awful lot of content out there on the internet aimed at them, created by them asking questions in Q&A forums. So these tools like a ChatGPT is going to be pretty effective at channeling that person, and specifically as it pertains to the way that you want to talk to them. So it can actually become a pretty good participant in role playing some messaging like, hey, I'm going to draft this nurture sequence. What do you think would be the most well received by this persona? So you can do activities like that. This is a low risk activity, and I'm going to do this with all of the tactics here as to how you're kind of mitigating the risks of the downsides of these tools. So with this one, it's a speculative activity. You're not publishing the content. You're just depending on it to seed you with relevant information about this persona who it has plenty of information about. So with that in mind, brainstorming content ideas, once you have these established, maybe you've created a GPT or you're using Notebook LM or something like that. Once you have established a vehicle for this communication, you can start to ask it, what do these people struggle with? So I punched in here, what questions would an enterprise SEO manager likely have about traffic declines in Google Search Console? And that's the start for coming up with some content ideas. Now you're going to have to iterate. I actually left this in, even though this isn't a particularly good answer for content ideation, because what it's giving me is a series of questions that person will immediately be able to self-serve. Like they'll be able to see when the decline started. So I don't need to write about that. I would come back and say, hey, sorry, I meant to say, what are some questions they wouldn't be able to answer for themselves? So you want to go back and forth and do feedback like that. But after some rounds of that, you're going to be left with a pretty solid list of ideas that you could burn down against. And this is another low risk thing. So in this case, for instance, we work with this persona. I would be able to curate and say, yeah, I don't think they would ask this, but they would probably ask this. So you're ultimately going to exercise your expertise and experience and judgment in doing this. And if not, you can always ask your buyer persona. Um, Switching gears a little, surfacing commercial keywords. This is something I actually do a lot. And you can probably tell by the very specific prompt, this was hard won over time. What you basically want to do is have it go out and look at your site and surface a list of ways that your buyers might describe what you offer. So in my case, I gave it this fairly refined prompt and it said, okay, essentially you're a content fulfillment partner, a content operations consultant. I mean, yeah, okay. Enterprise content program, so what you're really looking for is these descriptors, content fulfillment, content operations, essentially mine our site, give us a list of things that we do, and those become the basis of commercial keywords. And that's going to undergird your approach in answer engine visibility, search engine visibility. It's going to help you with a lot of things and it's going to be valuable. And this is extremely low risk because you know what you do. So when it comes up with this master list, you can cross things off, feed that back in and say, no, 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 we don't do this. Bear that in mind in the future. So I found this to be an extremely helpful exercise that we also do for clients. Mine support tickets and reviews for ideas. So this is basically the idea that you're going to have a lot of disparate information out there, and if you have a community Slack or a Discord or what have you, if you have support tickets coming in, all of these types of things, gather up information and maybe put it into something like Notebook LM or create a GPT with it. And it will have this specialized content corpus that you can use essentially to come up with real ideas that your audience is struggling with. And that becomes the seed for a backlog of potential content ideas and distribution channels. And again, this is pretty low risk. You're going to be able to validate this with your own knowledge. But here, you also have the seed information. So if you're using, say, like Notebook LM for this, you can go click through and see what it's referencing and read the person's input in their own words. There may be SaaSes that do that. I actually should have caveated that in the beginning. I do a lot of using of these texts just directly without going to the ends of the earth exploring miscellaneous specialized SaaSes. So that is a gap. I don't know exactly. There are probably 40 startups out there doing this, but I don't necessarily know what they are. I kind of go right to the source and the APIs. Um, Things to be careful of when you're doing this for ideation. I wouldn't ask it for keywords to target, like keyword research whole cloth. It's really bad at that. And the main reason for that is I don't think it has any differentiated sense of whether a human being would search this term or not. Certainly, it doesn't know what the keyword volumes are. So just delegating keyword research to it won't go well. Asking broadly for blog post ideas like, hey, here's my site, hit subscribe, what should I write about? It's going to give you very fluffy stuff like, you do some SEO stuff, you should write about what is SEO. You need to be more specific. And then finally, asking for holistic content or marketing strategy, unless you were just thrown into marketing from some other discipline and don't know what you're doing, which I doubt people watching this, it's probably not true of you, you're going to be better at content marketing strategy than the median wisdom of the internet. So I would flip it and come up with something and then ask it to sanity check for you. Next up, I'm going to go through how to use this for composition. And again, not to actually create the content, but different aspects of the creation process. So a great use case, at least for me, can be overcoming blank page syndrome. I'll explain more about that in a moment. Generating briefs and outlines to follow. It's pretty good at that in certain circumstances. Real strength is if you're writing up a list of supporting points of a thesis, you feed it those points and ask it if it has ideas for more. Excellent use case. Adapting existing content to other medium appropriate formats. I've written this blog post. Can you help me make it LinkedIn ready? Sanity checks and self-guided QA. I will have a whole section on QA right after this, but I'll talk a little bit about doing it for yourself. And then image asset generation to go in your post if you don't have a graphic designer at your disposal. So overcoming blank page syndrome, this is more kind of on a personal note, something that I'll do, and maybe you would find it useful if I'm writing something and I'm not really sure where to start, or I'm just staring at the blank draft screen. Um, this is kind of like an abbreviated version of something I'll do. So like write me a couple paragraphs about whatever, and then it does, and I read it, and this is generally my reaction, like, oh, I really don't like that, but now I know what I actually want to write. It can be pretty powerful for this. If there is an inner critic that comes out in you when you're reading similar content on the subject. So if that's useful for you, I absolutely endorse it, with the caveat that like you don't get too attached to what it's writing and just kind of get into writing the whole thing yourself. So this is going to be low risk activity since you're going to do the writing yourself. Creating briefs and outlines. This is something we do a lot of and have experimented a lot of, or a lot with. You can probably tell by the fact that I've got this, pre-canned. I just took a screenshot of a briefing document that we have with prompting. Basically, if you're templating something out in terms of briefing, if you want to have a standardized brief format, it can be very helpful in generating variations on that format. So what I've got in here is the highlighted stuff will fill in the specifics of a given post, and then you're going to ask it for an outline, observe that outline, and go back and forth with it a few times. And in the end, you'll probably have a brief that you are pretty happy with, whether it's for you to write or you're going to give it to somebody else. It's really good at incorporating constraints. And what I mean by that is if you wanted to come up with an outline, but you're writing a tools roundup listicle style post, it's going to need to list the tools or something like that. So you can specify, I want an outline. Here are the non-negotiable things. Suggest something for me. That's a really good use case. And you can also give it a template and say, like, this is the format that our briefs follow, comply with this, and it will. So this can actually be a pretty good way to operationalize your brief creating, even in spite of the non-determinism, because it's not going to be the exact same for every post, but it will be similar enough when you give it all this guidance to be valuable without being prescriptive and getting into overly formulaic content, especially because you can critique the briefs that it's creating. Um, Brainstorming additional bullets or points. This is fairly easy to understand, but this is a blog post I'm actually about to fire up on our website. So I took the draft of this and was using it for some of these examples. So here are 5 things that I came up with in this blog post. Can you think of any additional ones? And you then go and validate or dismiss at your discretion. So in this case, I don't like number 6. That doesn't really make sense. Number 7, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, maybe I could write about that. So that's kind of the idea, is to help round out or identify any gaps in what you're covering. This is another one that I like and that you can operationalize pretty well. So if you've written original content, you want to get its help in appropriating it for other media. So creating a blog post, appropriating for social media is a pretty good use case. You would, I would say, approach this in one of 2 ways. Number one, if you're going to caveat, so like after we do this webinar, I imagine Lindsay is going to take the transcript and put a post on our site that says, here's this webinar Eric did. Here is a ChatGPT summarized transcript. So if you're caveating it and saying we used ChatGPT or whatever to do that, then you can just go ahead and publish. Otherwise, if you're not explicitly saying that or it doesn't seem quite appropriate, you would maybe create a draft and then go make it your own. But this is different than whole cloth content creation because all of the original ideas are going to be yours. You're just summarizing or reformatting or redistributing in other places. And so for that reason, I'd say, given the caveating or maybe you're quoting or what have you, summarizing, this is a pretty low risk way to repurpose original ideas. Sanity checks and self-guided QA. So for my money, this is a great use case. You're writing something and you come in here and say, hey, have I said anything that's going to get me in trouble in here or whatever it is you might be concerned about? So I'm not sure about some of the facts in here. That wouldn't apply to the one I wrote here, but in some cases you might be worried about that. Whatever it is you perceive as a gap or you're worried about, get its input on. With all of these tools, however, this is important. So don't suck up to me or pull punches. You have to explicitly tell it not to be sycophantic. Otherwise, it's going to start with a paragraph about how great your draft is and then kind of say like, but here are a couple things, but it's probably no big deal. Like you have to explicitly tell it to be critical, and I would, because otherwise it's going to be too soft with you and coddle you, so to speak. And this is a pretty low risk activity because usually if it's this self-directed QA, you probably don't have a sanity checker sitting with you while you're drafting where you can say, hey, is this reasonable? So it's standing in for doing nothing. And for that reason, I like the use case. Image asset generation. In a lot of B2B scenarios, especially the larger your organization, you're probably going to have a graphic designer, especially for like blog content or whatever. But if you don't, if you're early stages, or if you're creating content in a medium where that doesn't apply or whatever, I found it just, plain chat GPT these days is pretty good with my paid subscription. So I don't remember what prompted it to ask this question, but I said, yeah, go ahead. And it created this graphic and that looks all right to me. Now, caveat emptor here, I am terrible at graphic design and evaluating graphics. So you're going to have to weigh in with your own like aesthetic preferences and everything, but it does an all right job. You sometimes have to kind of go at it a few times to get it to actually create the right dimensions and things like that. But I found it to be pretty serviceable in this capacity if you don't have someone doing graphic design. As for the risky things here, so this is an actual screenshot from my ChatGPT. I saw a meme about this. If you ask it which 2 NFL teams don't end with an S, it goes absolutely like it has a meltdown. This is just the beginning of it. So the reason I'm putting this here is it can bring that energy into your content creation. I mean, it won't melt down trying to answer a question and please you with a question that can't be answered, but this is emblematic of what can happen unsupervised. So you don't really want to rely on it to create expert type content at all. You don't want to, if you're going really into the weeds, if you want to research particle physics so you can talk to particle physicists, this isn't your aid. It's going to be a better stand-in for general knowledge. So if precision and accuracy are critically important, this isn't where you want to be using it to create content. So let me pause and see if I've aggregated any questions. I haven't seen anything, but I don't know that I would. So,
There's no open questions at the moment.
all right. I guess that baby scared everybody off. Uh, AI for quality assurance. This is probably my favorite category of use case. I think this is where it really shines. So there are three things I'll talk through here. Different flavors of sanity check, checking for technical SEO optimizations, which is a little bit nuanced, and then checking against established info or established brand and messaging guidelines can be pretty powerful there too. So specific content sanity checks, you could feed an article to a ChatGPT or whatever your tool of choice is and say, hey, what do you think of this? It's going to give you very broad advice and it might give you information about things that you don't even care about. And if it's ChatGPT, it's going to rewrite the post with a little bit of polish, whether you wanted that or not. So you need to be a lot more specific. And I would really zoom in and maybe even think of this as like several different personas that are evaluating the content. So what I'm getting at is you would have, maybe you build a GPT to do this at scale, or you just have different sessions with it and you say, I want to focus on just factual veracity. Let's go through this and do some fact checking. Now, you kind of have to overcome the fact that it's not the best fact tool in the world for that particular thing. But, having somebody who's imperfect, but maybe gets 90% of things right, that's not a bad QA role. It's probably not as good a draft role. Look for insensitive references, PR issues, grammar mistakes, whatever it may be, whatever you're lacking in either the composition or the review that you might have with an editor, anything like that, you can really layer in as a specific type of check for it to do. And then what you're going to want to do once that happens. So I'm going to do this check for PR or legal and compliance, which I'll get to later. You want to triage that and route it to a person to review. That could be the author. I mean, it really depends on your content operation, but you don't just want to take its words verbatim or it's going to tell you a bunch of stuff you don't really care about. So somebody needs to review and say, oh, yeah, okay, I'll worry about these three things. But this is a really great use case, either as in some cases a stand-in for no human doing it, or just to save the human that's going to do it some work, so they're in a more triage posture. So technical SEO opportunities, there is a lot that you can do. I don't want to get into the SEO weeds in this particular talk, but if you have a set of what you consider to be best practices, say mentioning keywords in H2s or H3s, whatever the case may be, there are a lot of bespoke SEO on page type checks that you can ask it to do of the content, and it will be quite good at. And it's a good fit because, unlike a human reviewer, if you give a human reviewer like 40 things to check for, there's no way they're going to remember all 40. That's a mess. But an automated entity will be diligent in that fashion, so it's good. You can take the output, like if it raises, I would blend in like standard SEO best practices with the specifics that you want. It might raise false positives or there might be false negatives. You want to tweak as you go and feed that back into it. But at scale, you can get this pretty good with the exception of word count. So I fed it a blog post. I asked how many words it was. It says it's about 2,105 words long. That's not how many words long it is. It's not about how many it was. It's just, I don't have any idea where it got this figure. It doesn't count. I guess that's why all the image generations have like 7 figures for humans or whatever. So don't ask it to give you the appropriate length meta description. It will give you something too long. It does that every time. Give me a 160 character meta description, you get like 180 characters. So as long as it doesn't involve counting, you're good. And then finally, brand voicing guidelines. So Notebook LM, I've got a little bit of a screenshot from that tool, but this can be a good use case for it. If you seed whatever you're using with any information you have, like your style guide, your brand opinions, particularly important, like plant the flag, manifesto, thought leadership articles, whatever you've got, feed it in there. And what you can do is then, against that specific knowledge base, you can vet a blog post that's coming through and essentially ask it, is there anything that's incompatible with our brand or with our messaging? Are we telling any people like, are we getting opinions wrong here? Especially valuable if you're enlisting, freelancers or outside contributors, and you're trying to maintain a brand voice across all of that. This is a low risk concern because, again, you're going to escalate it to humans to check, whoever that might be. You're not leaving it up to the tool to make that determination or create brand compliant content. You're just relying on it to say, hey, this might be something you want to take a look at. As for what to avoid here, I would avoid in QA mode, like I said, asking for open-ended feedback. Like, what do you think of this blog post? It's sycophantic. It's going to tell you it's a great blog post, and it'll probably give you such generic things that they're not actionable, or it's unlikely to give you the right thing that you're looking for unless you're specific about what you're looking for. Again, I wouldn't ask for strategic input. When it comes to this, you're really just delegating it with a very narrow charter to go through and look for a specific category of problem with the content. And again, anything to do with counting, it just won't get that right. Don't rely on it for word counts. Don't rely for a number of times a keyword is mentioned, nothing like that. Um, the next category here is content maintenance. And this is generally if you have a channel, like SEO is going to be the most common one search that's bringing you traffic regularly over time. The content can get stale now from a search perspective. That's going to make it rank worse. But you might have it in some other medium where it's getting like referral traffic or something. As content gets stale, generative AI can be a pretty helpful ally for identifying stale content. So specifically, I'm going to talk through checking the content itself for like dates or dated references, finding internal linking opportunities, because if you produce something 3 years ago, the last 3 years worth of content might be linkable from that old post, but you haven't done it. Doing a gap analysis for ranking purposes. So we've lost some ground in the SERP. What has displaced us and what is our article missing? Suggesting tagging for content inventories and CTA mapping exercises. These are semi-proprietary things that we do, and I'll explain more in those individual slides rather than trying to here. So checking for dated content, there might be, I'm guessing there's probably a startup or a SaaS type of thing where you can get a WordPress plugin or whatever, where it will ingest all of your content pretty easily. I don't have anything like that at my disposal. So I might just go take a look at an individual URL, I can get ChatGPT to crawl a URL, or you copy and paste a blog post in, and you're essentially saying, is this out of date? Do you see anything in here that could be construed as old or stale information? And right out of the gate, it's actually pretty good at that. I found that its output is fairly valuable without you even prompting it any further. But what I would generally do if you're establishing a GPT or an SOP around this is seed it with criteria. So I want you to surface anything that's older than this time frame if it has old software versions. So whatever you would think of as making a post stale, outdated language, dated cultural references, that type of thing. And you can go and feed false positive and negative back in as you go along and tune it. And it gets pretty good at, you just feed it in and say, hey, does this need a refresh? And you can pretty reliably have it generate a list for you. And probably 9 out of 10 of them, yes, it could use a refresh. And this also is going to take pretty well to agentic workflows. I actually have a project that we might do from an R&D perspective on trying that. So that's kind of interesting. And it's a very low risk activity because you're just surfacing this for triage. Anything where it's saying, hey, this could use a refresh. I mean, you're obviously going to read it and do stuff to it because you're going to refresh it potentially. So it just naturally really takes well to this technology. Checking for linking opportunities. This is something that it doesn't do real well out of the gate, but I've done a good bit of hacking with, and I've got a set of prompting things that works okay here. I mean, Yoast Premium, there are tools that will do this, but if you take a blog post and you paste it into one of these tools and you give it a sitemap and you tell it the sitemap. So for those of you actually that don't know, a sitemap is this XML file that is almost certainly on our website that has essentially a list of all the blog posts that you want Google search engines to index. And if you feed it this list of your URLs and you tell it infer what the what the content is about from the URL slug, because most people just give it a title and it goes live with that slug. It can infer the title and thus the subject matter. Now, you wouldn't want to do that for like QAing the post, but for internal linking, that's actually usually good enough. So you feed it that sitemap file and you say, here is my blog post. And then you say, I want you to limit yourself to only text within the blog post I gave you, because otherwise it'll suggest paragraphs and stuff to add the links. Limit yourself to that text, and then it gives you pretty good suggestions. So in this case, suggestion number one here, that's a great internal linking suggestion. Suggestion number two, I'm not as sure about, but here's what happens in the end. You wind up with, maybe 6, 10 suggestions, and about half of those are good. And that's 3 to 5 more backlinks than you would have had in this post anyway. So uh, unambiguously good, fairly efficient. I definitely endorse this, and certainly low risk. Tagging for content inventory. So generally speaking, it's difficult to keep track of all of your content. And we actually have tooling around this, which is, you're seeing a screenshot here of this. In theory, the database supporting your CMS will have this information. You might be able to put something on top and manage the database that way. But in a lot of cases, you don't have great information about the URLs on your site. So we're creating tooling that ingests a sitemap, ingests URLs from your site, and then we apply what we call tagging to it. So tagging here is where we're tagging it in multiple what's the word I'm looking for? Multiple select. This is an Airtable base where it's an attributes type field. So you tag it, with it's on the blog or it's on the learn. You tag it with the byline of the author, maybe the content campaign, maybe if it's a guide or a tutorial. So we apply a lot of tags to the content. And the idea there is it helps with triaging traffic increases or decreases. And it also lets you evaluate groups of URLs to see how they're performing. Anyway, without getting into the weeds of that, if you are doing something like that, if you're categorizing your content in some fashion, these tools are very good at it because of the pattern matching and pattern extension. So if you start out with some prototypes, you can say, okay, I've tagged like 10% of my site. Based on what I've done, suggest tagging for the rest of the site. Now it's going to do most of the heavy lifting, and you're going to, maybe tweak or tune the occasional thing and improve it as you go. But by and large, it's going to get that right. So this can be powerful, whereas you're adding new things to the site, you can develop a workflow where it's suggesting right out of the gate how you should categorize these things. And if you uh, are suggesting things yourself, you can also have it like sanity check you. So it tends to be very useful in a context like this. And CTA mapping, this is a similar exercise we do. So generally speaking, on your site, you're going to have this backlog of assets, webinars and white papers and such. And you're also going to have a huge backlog of URLs, a lot of which will be earning organic traffic passively. And it's vanishingly unlikely that you have paired the best asset with the best URL. So if you're trying to do this exercise of which blog posts that are getting traffic would be good to pair with our white paper about X topic, these tools are very good at that. Feed it the list of assets that you have with descriptions of the assets, feed it the list of URLs, ideally with the content, and then say, hey, suggest matchings here for me, and it will do that. And you will probably have, 80+% success rate of it making good suggestions. So this can be a very valuable way for you to do an audit and improvement on conversion rate optimization stuff. And again, low risk. You're just getting a suggestion for what somebody's going to go out and edit it. So you can be in the operation in real time, validating what it suggests. So when it comes to maintenance, I know I said in the QA section you could use these tools for fact checking. Be careful with fact checking. If you're out like looking for, where on our site are we saying things that are wrong, you're going to have to probably be a lot more specific, but this isn't how I would think of it from a maintenance perspective. I would more trust it to identify dated references. Um, I wouldn't go and ask it like, hey, does this blog post need to be updated? Because it will try to come up with content for you. So it's going to bias for coming up with reasons you should update it. I would be very specific and be asking, does it have any of these things that determine it needs to be updated? And then in terms of prioritization, the amount of context that you're going to have to give it about your strategy is probably going to be prohibitive. So if you just say, which one of these blog posts should I update, instead of saying, I can't answer that unless you tell me about conversion rates and traffic and such, it'll just make something up, and you don't want that. So now I want to switch gears a little bit, and the next set of I have a few more broad categories, but they're going to tend to be shorter here as I round out the presentation. So this one is about program efficiency. You have however many staff members involved in producing and reviewing and publishing content. How do you make that program more efficient? So the first idea here that you could do is generate draft editorial calendar tooling. So this is more of a build like a vibe coding or frameworking use case. You could identify staffing opportunities if you have a very large operation and bench. You can use it as a stand-in for either absent reviewers that you want or people that are bottlenecking with their review due to time constraints or pickiness about the content. And then you can also, the last one is a little bit subtle, but if you have somebody that's really doing a lot of red pen reviews and that's time consuming, you can use it to maybe triage and surface what they should focus on. So generating draft tooling, I haven't done this because we have some pretty established IP and Airtable for our content ops applications. But if you just had an old spreadsheet and that wasn't doing it for you, I bet if you went in and told Airtable to build an app with Omni and specified what your content operation was and what you wanted to do, it'd probably build you a pretty serviceable base. Um, so I would definitely recommend experimenting with something like that to see if you like what it comes up with. And the more context you can give it about your situation, the better. This is low risk because if you don't like it or it doesn't work for you, you don't have to use it. It's not going to take a long time, but you might give this a try and find that you're pretty pleased with the results. I would definitely only use it for prototyping, though. Make it your own after that and refine it. Um, Identifying staffing opportunities. So this is a screenshot with identifying information blurred out about people of a slice of our bench database. And you can see that we have different roles and different personas in here. And there's, I don't remember how many people, maybe 400 in the base. So imagine that we have a client that's in application security and they're going to be writing about a certain set of topics. And we need to go out and identify a group of authors and maybe somebody to do editing or publishing from this pool of people. That's a pretty heavy lift for, poor Aaron who's on the call to go in and look through all that. So to feed the database into a tool that does excellent pattern matching and pattern recognition, along with potentially the bios or LinkedIn profiles of some of these folks, if you can seed it with that information, it's going to get pretty good at identifying those folks that might be a good fit. And when you do this, what I would do is prompt it with, I want you to give me a list of people that would be well suited for this. I also want you to explain why you picked those people. And you will have a pretty solid starting point compared to, trying to do tag sorts or whatever. You can see that I have some tags in here. Sparsely populated or whatever, that can get hard because if you're going to do sorting based on tags or filtering based on tags, somebody has to maintain all those tags. The tool can infer a lot of that information from their profiles and other data. So again, there's no real risk here because it's not like you're probably going to have an agent go and handle your staffing. It's just going to give the actual person assigning content a list of candidates, and then the assignment will be done. Stand in for human reviewers. So this kind of gets into the point where you're going to use this as an alternative to simply doing nothing. That's a really good use case. So if the choice is nobody or the AI, choose the AI with the caveat that it's something you're concerned about. So I wouldn't go out and invent 15 different ways for ChatGPT to review your blog post. But if it's always kind of bothered you that you don't have anyone to really look at this through a PR lens or a compliance lens, then you could set up a GPT to do that kind of specific checking. And then you're going to route that editorial feedback to probably the author or maybe a proofreader or both of them to get their opinions. So it's going to be the paradigm of surfacing issues, human triaging. And you will want to engage what I talked about in the QA section. It's going to be dedicated and specific reviewer GPTs or personas or whatever. And you will only want to engage or take the important stuff that it's surfacing. It's going to err on over communicating. So this is a pretty low risk thing in general because the alternative in this situation would be that just nobody's doing the check. So you're just layering in a sanity check. I guess if it gets cumbersome and it's delaying your content production, you might revisit it, but that's really your only risk. Oops, one slide too many. So tear this apart, triage. Going the opposite direction, if you have a lot of reviewers and you're slow to get content live and the reviewers are giving conflicting feedback or taking a lot of red pen to it, maybe if you're like the content manager, it's a reviewer that's been forced on you, it's non-negotiable. This can really slow down content. If you find yourself in this situation, a good way to enlist a tool like ChatGPT would be to do a canned pass up front and then to hand the content and the chat GPT output to the reviewer. So you're essentially focusing their review and trying to template it. And that can actually save them time and effort. And it can focus them on just a narrow subset of things instead of turning the whole thing into like a Reddit comment dogfight where they're undirected in their review. So they're just going in and anything they find issue with, they're marking up, whereas maybe you only want them there to review legal concerns. So this can actually be a way to get just as much coverage, but keep everybody a little bit more focused. This isn't going to work in all environments or with all personas or types of people, but it can be effective. And I would say this is low risk, especially if the content production is delayed enough that it's hurting your funnel metrics more than the review is inoculating against risk. That's kind of an arbitrage from an ROI and process perspective. Where I would be careful about involving LLM text in your process when it comes to operations as a true stand-in for a human, meaning if you have the red pen every reviewer and you don't want that anymore, but they're important because they're a compliance expert, you don't want ChatGPT serving in that role. I would beware going back to the first point. If you vibe code something up, the tool will almost certainly over engineer and gold plate. I mean, it's just like humans back when I was like managing software teams. So it'll probably give you more than you need, err on the side of paring it down to just what you need. And I wouldn't do anything like trying to get an agentic implementation to load stuff in a CMS. There are so many fiddly things going from Google Doc to CMS and formatting and all of that, it will get them wrong. I just wouldn't replace that with a human right now, or a human with that right now. So I only have one or maybe two more short sections to go, but just it's not actually the end of the presentation, but close. Any additional questions that have come in? I'm going to assume no and move on, but stop me if there are. So performance evaluation, meaning how is your content doing? Three use cases I can think of here: interpreting raw data, correlating attributes of the contents with performance data, and then assisting in the creation of executive decks, communicating the information to folks outside of the content operations or the content operation. So interpreting raw data, now there are almost certainly tools out there. I'm sure there are startups that have made things where like you give it your Google Analytics data, and then you can write like language queries to ask about that. So if you know of those and they work for you, I think it's probably good. I can do this with ChatGPT, just feeding raw data in from our databases or analytics or what have you. But what you're generally going to want to do here is give it this raw data and then ask conversational questions about it. And if you give it your analytics data and you say something like, "It seems like our traffic is declining. Is that true? Why do you think it might be declining?" That's kind of what I'm getting at to help you interpret the data because it's very good at pattern matching and pattern recognition. Now, one critical thing here, and you can see it in the screenshot, if you give it too little information, there is a garbage in, garbage out paradigm. I just gave this thing a screenshot of Ahrefs and said, "Why am I losing traffic?" It should have said, "I don't have enough information. You need to give me more information." Instead, it just made stuff up that wasn't true. So you want to be careful of that. And if you ask it something like, "Why am I losing traffic?" your next step is to take the most likely cause and then somehow try to corroborate that. So treat it as you're a detective and it's giving you leads to look into. It's giving you things to confirm, but it will come up with solid hypotheses and it will get you a long way there, especially in interpreting raw data. So it's a very low risk kind of activity as long as you don't just repeat what it says as gospel and you actually confirm it. Um, Another more specific version of this is confirming or correlating attributes of your content with its performance. So if you give the tool your 50 highest traffic or highest ranking URLs and your 50 lowest ranking URLs, and you say, what patterns do you see here? You tell it to give you maybe statistically significant ones. It is insanely good at going in and identifying what the different groups of URLs will have in common. And it might tell you something like, tutorials do better than guides or whatever the case may be. Now, this is another situation where once it gives you those insights, you're going to want to independently corroborate them somehow. Now, maybe you go and look that up and see if it's actually true, or maybe you just produce 10 tutorials and see if they behave better as you would expect. Whatever it is, you want to validate it, but it's very good at giving you ideas and insights of that nature. And then finally, this is a different kind of beast, but if you have a lot of this data and you're drawing conclusions and you need to do a readout for executives or you need to present, this is excellent for helping with that. Not only for creating the actual like content and format, but you can also, I've found, ask it for help with compelling visual aids from your raw notes. And that's back to the asset generation, like creating an infographic about this. And after a trip or two back and forth, you'll probably have something good. But here's another one that I love. Ask it for analogies and explanations. It does pretty well at explain this to me like I'm a beginner. And that can be pretty helpful for communicating to people outside of your group that aren't in the weeds of what you're doing in content metrics. And again, this is low risk because you're not relying on it for facts. You're relying on it to communicate the facts to somebody with a different level of knowledge about the situation. Where I would be careful in anything like this is just kind of what I harped on throughout of it, or throughout the last few slides, is you don't want to just repeat what it says. You want to form your own conclusions, so garbage in and garbage out. And you really want to avoid providing it with incomplete information. I have done this. You can just give it a list of URLs and say which ones of these perform the best. And unless they've fixed it, it'll just make stuff up. So if you don't give it accurate or complete information, it will try to fill in the gaps itself by making things up. Um, Governance and compliance, this is the last one that I've got, and probably of particular importance to those of you in the enterprise. So the use cases here that I like, if you are not in the enterprise or earlier stage, you can use this as a sanity check to having nobody from legal or compliance that you can even consult. So if you're just out there and hoping you're not going to get the company sued, you can ask it for a sanity check. That's actually a great use case. Identifying trigger words in the article. So which articles might you want to escalate for a little bit more looking at. And then finally, identifying inconsistencies in terms of your own guarantees or policies, things of that nature. So the sanity check for legal or compliance, this is one I threw the blog post I was talking about in here just to ask it a question. I don't have anyone from legal, like I don't have our lawyer read blog posts that I write. So the alternative would be nothing. And it came back, and this is actually, fairly reasonable. I'm referencing a comic, and it might have copyright implications. So this is a good way to surface anything for further investigation if you are concerned, and depending on your appetite for risk. Once it surfaces that stuff, I wouldn't turn around and ask it, oh, is what I'm doing legal? Because it will tell you something, and that something may not be right. So once you see the risks, if you really want to dig into them, that's when you're going to want to consult somebody other than the LLM. But this tends to be low risk because it's going to be what you're doing when you wouldn't have done anything. Um, Reviewing and escalating trigger words. So this is more maybe of a specific instance of what I talked about before, but you could seed this by just asking ChatGPT or something about like what are trigger words that might have compliance implications or legal implications. But you can also brainstorm yourself. So if you are making claims that something is the best or the fastest or that it's HIPAA compliant or that it's safe, those are all words that you might want to seed it with and say, hey, are we making any claims in here, or do we have any words that suggest we might be making claims? So you ask it to review for those words and the context around them to flag this as potentially a legal risk. So that's a more focused and precise way to surface potential legal and compliance information. And again, low risk because you're just triaging. And then finally, this could be an application for a notebook LM or something like that, but take all of the guarantees that you make either in your onboarding or on your site or what have you, and put them into a tooling like this, and then check content against it. Are we claiming anything that we don't actually offer? Are we misstating our guarantees? That type of thing. And this is to kind of guard against the risk of you saying something on your site that is at odds with how you conduct business with people eventually. You don't want to get yourself into that kind of trouble. And again, just flagging for review. So it's a fairly high leverage, low risk use case. Now, here be dragons in this particular set of usages, in the sense that this is absolutely not a substitute for actual legal or compliance review. If that is part of your process, I wouldn't get rid of those experts in favor of a tool like this. ChatGPT and its ilk are going to be very good at like processing and surfacing case law, but they will make deductions that are not the correct deductions. So they are not lawyers. I would not, by the same token, turn around if it had said, "Hey, you might want to think about this XKCD comic," and for me to say, "Oh, well, okay, read my post and tell me if I'm violating Michigan law or whatever jurisdiction applies." I'm not going to believe its answer or take that answer to the bank. It will fill in blanks if it doesn't know. So that really rounds out the tactics. I'm just going to wrap up here right at the hour, as it turns out, with practical tips. So if you're doing none of this, here's kind of maybe what I would just immediately do in a vacuum if I were you. The ones that are the right combination of high leverage and easy to do. So the persona exercise, establishing a GPT or a notebook LM or whatever the case may be to represent your buyer persona, I would absolutely do that exercise, because not only can that make for potentially valuable QA and ideation, it's also just a good exercise to do so that you can understand your buyer personas. Also, I would define all of your commercial terms, because you're going to want to track those tools visibility across the, or those term visibility across the board. It's going to inform the content you create. It's going to inform the supporting content you create, linking. That's kind of a real bedrock thing to be doing for search visibility. I would establish a repurposing workflow. So you're creating blog posts. How do you turn them into LinkedIn assets or what have you? That type of thing is extremely good for your program efficiency, and it's not very hard to do. So that's a piece of low hanging fruit I would go for. I would also look at establishing these QA roles, let's call them. So your PR GPT, your grammar style guide GPT, whatever the case may be, establish those and bounce the content that you're creating off of them. Pretty easy to do. And finally, I would prototype some way to feed performance information into these tools and get interpretations back out. Not because you're going to immediately get to the holy grail of having valuable insights, but I think that exercise is valuable and it's worth prototyping something out so that it's established end to end and you can build on it as time goes on. Because I think that's something that's missing in a lot of content programs, is that closing of the loop. We're pumping out all of this content and sure, I guess it's getting traffic, or, it seems pretty good or what have you. I think a lot of teams really miss out on opportunities to actually close the loop on performance and feed that back into the editorial machine to make sure that you're creating that kind of content that does well in those channels. And that is it. Any questions here at the end? I have the same slide. This time it is the end of the presentation.
No, there's no questions.
All right. So whoops, I had the wrong slide, but I do have the slide at the end. Some of these were a screenshot of our Osiris tool, so I've got a link to that in here. And just to follow up, if any of you watching live or consuming this later, if you're interested in some of the prompt suggestions that I was screenshotting, or just prompt suggestions for these things in general, happy to do that. And we have a lot of templates around briefing and content creation. If you were interested in those, we can furnish stuff for you there as well. And that'll do it. I am right on the 1 hour mark. Wow. I'm amazed that that happened. I appreciate everybody tuning in. We are doing this as a monthly or bi-monthly series, so there will be more of these if you found this interesting. And yeah, thank you for your time.